Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Arav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. So I think what we'll do is go to the next chapter now, which is Kuf Tzadik Daled. So let's go out there and let's see what we can do there. It says שלושה שאכלו כאחד ושכחו וברך כל אחד ואחד לעצמו. So what happened? We had three people, right? They ate together. They forgot to make zimun, and just everybody blessed by himself. Birkat Hamazon. So what happens at that point? So it says, but tell them the zimun. Now, the zimun is already nullified, right? You can't do it. That's it. Too late. ואין יכולים לחזור לזמן לפריה. And they cannot go and do zimun at the end, Let's do it at the end. No, too late. Right? וכן אם ברכו שניים מהם, also two of them blessed. Same thing. Too late. אבל אם שכח אחד מהם וברך השניים יכולים לזמן על הגימל, oh. So he says, but if one of them forgot, and the other two are still, in the way holding mode, right? They haven't done it yet. So they can do the zimun since they have a majority, they can do it. Okay. So you can still answer zimun. Wow. So that's an important thing to know. Sometimes this happens, One person, jumped out, and he did it, the Birkat Hamazon. He can still combine with the other two who didn't do. אוקיי. שכבר ברח יכול לומר ברשכון ראשונו, דלא גרע מאכל עמהם עלה של ירק. So he says it's not any worse than somebody who ate with them, some little vegetable or something, והם יוצאים ידי זימון, and they do fulfill זימון like that. והוא אינו יוצא זימון, שאין זימון למפריע. So that's very interesting what he says, right? That he himself, the guy who jumped out and did the Birkat Hamazon, he himself doesn't really, fulfills obligation for zimun, but they do, by including him. So he's included with them, but he doesn't really get the mitzvah. He lost it because he jumped out. That's what he says in the Torah. Okay. So let's see Bet Yosef here. It says, Bet Yosef, "V'achi Rabbeinu beresh perek shlosha she'achlu." That's where it is in the Gemara. Mem He Amudeh Bet in Berachot. Gabe Uvda de Yehuda Bar Meremo, right? So this rabbi, whatever that was there, or more Baravashe, two rabbis, Rabbi Achan, three. This is rabbi number three, Midifti. Three rabbis were there. The Ita two Hatam, right? So those, in other words, those three rabbis, it happened with them. This exact situation that we just described. The Ita two Tam Hatam. It says also there. Furthermore, Nun Amud Aleph. Amar Rab Tosfa'a, right? This Rabbat Tosfa'a, this rabbi says, "Hane talata de karche rifta be'adei adade." So he says, if there was three guys and they ate bread together, they had a meal together, right? Since I said guys, you may think, I'm coming to exclude women, but the truth is, we don't really exclude women from zimun. So we'll see, right? We're going to get to that issue. If women can do zimun and so forth and so on, sometimes they can do zimun, women. So they're not really excluded from a mitzvah. Anyway, so it says here, so it says if one of them jumped out, right, and did the Birkat Hamazon, they do fulfill the obligation, he does not. That's the thing. Why? Because there's no retroactive zimun. This is the problem. כתב הראש, says the Rosh, nafke bezimun dideh, afa pi shekvar berach. So he says they do combine with him, they can do the zimun with him. Even though he already blessed, matzil memar baruch she'achal mishalo, you can still say, right, answer the zimun. The lo gara miba b'toch seuda, it's not any worse than somebody who comes in the meal, during the meal, v'achal aleh riek, and he eats some vegetable. Shomer imhem baruch hu she'achalnu mishmiu. So what is he saying over here, right? That we also have a scenario like that where, let's say, you have two people, right, just ate a meal. The third guy, right, didn't really eat with them, but if he takes a little piece of something to eat there, kazayit of something, he can also combine with them, even though he's not really, he didn't really eat the meal together with them, just had a little snack there, took a bite of something. So if it's not any worse than that case, he says. So therefore, so what does that mean? It's not any worse than that case. What's the connection between this case and that case? So the answer is apparently, right, that since this guy really didn't eat much, just had a little bit taste, tasted something there. So you really should not combine, because he wasn't a part of the meal. But nevertheless, we do combine him. So what he's saying is, right, the same thing with this guy. It's not any worse. He already ate, so he doesn't really combine for himself. But anyway, right, because he jumped ahead. But nevertheless, right, since he did eat after all, he was there. So therefore, we do combine him. Something like that. Okay, so anyway, goes on here. יהיו לא להפיק מי זימון דידו, לפי שאין זימון המפריע בדווקא שניים עם האחד. So he says, when we say that, when we have two with one, אבל אם ברחו שניים, אין שלישי יכול לזמן עמהם. But if two already jumped out, right, and did the Birkat Hamazon, so then the third guy is not going to be enough, to do zimun. Because already the majority have already right, done Birkat Hamazon. So Basically, the right the ceremony's over. Let's put it this way, right? That's what it pretty much is. וכן כתב רשב"א ז"ל, that's what the Rashba says. ופרק הנזכר, it says in this aforementioned פרק, גבי דאמר רב הונא, שלושה שבאו משלושה חבורות. So we said over there, right, in the Gemara, that, as, we spoke about this yesterday, that if three people came from three different groups, right, each one from one group, they cannot really divide. כתב לפי גרסתו, so he writes that according to his text, של רבינו, of Rabbeinu, and that which we said, right, that they can do zimun with him. היינו, אחד דלא יצא שלישי ידך זימון. That's if the third guy didn't do zimun. אבל דנפיק זימון, but if he already did zimun, third guy, כמו כגון שנצטרף עם השניים, for instance, they combine with the two, שבאו משתי חברות, they came from two groups, אחרות, the two different groups, וזימנו יחד פרח זימון בין בני חברתו. So then, the zimun already, right, already left them. It's already gone. But לא נפקו, and therefore they don't fulfill their obligation. But two bezimun dideh, with his zimun. כתבתי בסוף הזימן שקודם זה, right? So we already saw this in a chapter before, as we said. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch. Kuf Tzadik Daled. So it says here, שלושה שאכלו כאחד, as we said, right? Three people ate together. ושכחו, וברך כל אחד לעצמו. So what happened? They forgot to do zimun, right? Everyone just did Birkat Hamazon. So, but tell them zimun, there's no more zimun for them, right? It's gone. So retroactively, they cannot come back now and say, "Oh, let's do zimun after." No, I cannot do after. There's no way to do after. Also, if two of them blessed, right, and one of them did not. But if only one of them went and blessed, he went ahead. Right? So then, these two can make zimun with the third guy. Even though he already blessed, he can still answer the zimun. So what happens, right? They fulfill their obligation, and he does not, meaning zimun. Okay. Shen zimun mafreya. Why is that? Because there is no zimun retroactively. So says the Ramah here, ve'ima echad zimun zimen im acherim. What about if one did zimun with others? Av shenayim hanesharim enam yecholim lezamen. So then he says even the two remaining guys cannot do it. And that's what we saw just now, right in the Bit Yosef. In the name of the Rashba. So that's a trick over here, right? The trick is that this can only be done if one of them went ahead, and did Birkat Hamazon. Then they can still do zimun. But if he already did zimun with somebody else, with a different group, he cannot do zimun now with these guys. That's what we're saying. Okay, great. Let's move on. So we have all kinds of scenarios like this going on. Right, go to the next scenario. Which is, שלושה שאכלו ויצא אחד מהם לשוק. What happened? that three people ate together, and one of them, right, went out to the street. You know, let me read this inside the Torah. קוראים לו, מודיעים לו, או שרוצים לזמן. So he says, you know what you do? You call him, right? You know, like you open the door and you say, hey, buddy, come back. You know, we need you over here. We gotta do zimun. Step back into the right into the office over here. That's what we do, he says. כדי שיכוון להצטרף עמהם. Why? Because we want him to, combine and, have intention and everything. ויענה עמהם ברכת המזימון, and also answer the zimun. ויוצאים, and they do full obligation, אף על פי שאינו בא ויושב עמהם. Oh, so he says this applies even if he doesn't come and sit with them. So apparently this means that, as long as he answers and hears them, this can be done, regardless of, whether he returns or not. Interesting. So, he says, when does that apply with three people? About Beyud, when it comes to 10 people, if you want to mention the name of God with 10 people, right? Then he doesn't combine like that. Until what? He comes back, he returns, right, and sits there with them. Now it brings in another scenario here, but we should do Bet Yosef first before we go into that. So it says Bet Yosef here, שלושה שאכלו ויצא אחד מהם בשוק, right? Three people ate. One of them went out to the street, as we said, right? The truth is, he doesn't really say the street. He says the market, but it's all the same. Okay. Sometimes the truth is, the word shuk usually means a market, but sometimes it does mean the street also, like loosely, that's sometimes it's like a euphemism for the street. Okay, whatever, but it's all the same. It doesn't really matter. Um, when you go to Israel, right, if they tell you, over there, let's go to the shuk, you know where they're taking you? There's like a special marketplace over there, There's one in Yerushalayim, there's one in Tel Aviv, right? There's one in Haifa probably also, if I'm not mistaken, right? So they have like a big market there, They call it the shuk, right? But the supermarkets, they don't call shuk over there, They call it like a super, They say, let's go to the super, But the shuk is like the marketplace. What that means is like it's like a conglomeration of stores, It's like a mall kind of thing, But in a more primitive way. Whatever, right? More Middle Eastern way. Let's put it this way. So yeah, so they still have the shuk today. Anyway, so it says here in the Bet Yosef, he brings a source for this, right? בריש פרק שלושה שאכלו, it's also in the Gemara there in ברכות. מ"ה עמוד ב', אמר רב דיני בר יוסף, אמר רב שלושה שאכלו כאחד. So what happened, right? It says three people that ate together. ויצא אחד מהם לשוק. So one of them went out to the shuk, right? He went to the market, whatever, right? Okay. קוראים לו, מזמנים לו אליו. So what do, right? We call him, hey, listen, buddy. We need you, He doesn't have to come back, actually, as we said, right? He just has to listen to you, and he answers, and that's good enough, right? He doesn't have to actually be there. as we said, אמר רב דימי בר יוסף אמר רב שלושה שאכלו כאחד ויצא אחד מהם משוק קוראים לו מזמין אליו אמר אביי והוא דקראו ל וענה. So he said that's only when Abaya says if they call him and he answers. In other words, they can still hear each other, so he can answer. Amar Mor Zutra velo amaran ela bishlosha. So Mor Zutra says, right, that's only applies to three people. But when you have 10 people, that's a different story. Right? Until but when you have 10 people, he has to actually physically return, to the room. Why is that? My tama, because we want to mention the name of God. So if you're doing that, you have to have physical presence there. So he says, it's not proper, he says, to do it with less than 10 people to mention the name of God. Right? So Rashi explains this. Right? What does this mean? That they call him and he answers? Right? So that means he's close enough to answer, and everything, right? In other words, they can communicate, verbally. They're close enough to communicate. Answer. לא אמרן, לא צריך limited לגביו אלא שלושה. When did we say he doesn't have to come in? Well, that's only if you have three people. אבל עשרה, but if you have 10 people, now we're talking about the name of God, שהצטרפו משום הזכרת השם, עד לגביו. So then he has to actually physically, right, show up there. Okay. And then he says, והראש כתב, says the ראש, that's only if they, as we said, right? He calls them and they call him and he answers. So we have to notify him, he says, right, that he should have the in mind to combine with them. Birkat He's going to answer the blessing of the zimun. That's what it says in Rabbeinu Yonah. Okay. So great. The Katav Rashba says the Rashba, B'Shem Rabbeinu Hai, right? Name Rabbeinu Hai. So we already figured out, right, according to the context of things here, that the Ramban was before these Rishonim. He was there, like the main Rebbe of these Rishonim. And Rabbeinu Yonah was after the Ramban, right? They had correspondence. They probably, he was a Talmid. And the Talmid of Rabbeinu Yonah was the Rashba. That's the order of things. So apparently, right, when the Rashba passed away, they didn't have any great rabbis in Spain anymore. So they brought the Rosh from Germany to be the chief rabbi there. That's what happened, So the Rosh was the next on line after the Rashba passed away. That's the order of things. And then you have also the Ran, and then you have the Rivash, right? And the Rashbesh, Rashbetz, and the Rashbesh. So these were like the last Rishonim in Spain. That was the end of like the Spanish era of Rishonim. And then when Maran Bet Yosef, he was also in Spain, right? What happened was that during the Inquisition he had to leave. He's probably afraid for his life, so he left. He ran off. So that was the end of the golden era of Spain. That was it, right? That was the close of the whole procession there, right? And but this rabbi, Rav Hai Gaon, right? Rav Hai is not really, is not from that line. Rav Hai was one of the Geonim, right? He was before the Rishonim. So we're talking about like 500 years before, and most of the Geonim, where did they live? They didn't live in Spain. Most of the Geonim were in Babel, in the Middle East, Iraq, that area. That's where they came from. So yeah, so the Rishonim came after the Geonim. That's the way it is, right? So you have the Geonim, and then you with the Rabbeinu Hananel, who was the last generation of the Geonim, and after him, his Talmid was the Rif. The Rif was the first generation of the Rishonim, and the Rif, his Talmid was the Rimigash, right? And he was the rabbi of the he was the Rebbe of the Rambam. So that's how it started out. That whole generation there, that whole line of succession came like that. Okay, there you go. So just filling you in on a little bit of the history of these rabbis. It's important to know these things, actually. It's worthwhile to study these things. Anyway, getting back to our discussion here. So Mishnah, it says, it brings the Rashba, B'Shem Rabbeinu Hai, name Rabbeinu Hai, right? It said, Rav Hai was from the Geonim. Shamar Misham Ravata, he said, he rings the name of the rabbis, the Kor'in Lo Ambarchin Alav. Just by the way, before we continue, I wanted to tell you also something interesting, right? Which is that the Geonim were after the rabbis of the Talmud, right? Rav Asher and Ravina, they came after that period. So the truth is, that they were like in the same yeshivot, the same building. Can you imagine that Rav Asher and Ravina, all these big rabbis of the Emoraim from the Talmud, those yeshivot, right, in Bavel, in Iraq, though the Geonim were in the same building, that they were, and they learned after them, the following generations. So the tradition comes very clearly, from this line of Chachamim, it's very clear. One generation after the other. That's the thing, our Torah is a tradition, we have a tradition. It's not something, something you just make up, I mean, well, it comes from Har Sinai. Okay, so anyway, right, getting back to reality. Here, let's get back to reality. So, as we said, right, the Rashba, he brings Rabbi and Rav Hai. Misham Ravata, them קוראים לו, מברכים עליו, הנה מילה כגון שפתחו של פתחו של בית השוק והוא יושב כנגד בקוראים. Right, so he says, right, that what are we talking about? As we said, right, there has to be close proximity here. So he says that the way the arrangement works over here, in this case, is that when you leave the house, right, where they were making the zimun, the market is right outside there, like that's why they can hear each other. They're very close. That's what we're talking about. And he's right sitting next to them. Right, they call him, so they can hear him, they hear, right, he hears them. As we said, right, that's the idea. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah, says Rabbeinu Yonah, Gabe ha diamar Ravuna, regarding that which Ravuna said, Shlosha bnei Adam, three people, Shebao mishlosha chaburot, that they came from these three groups, right? Enam Rashaim nichalek, they cannot divide. We spoke about that yesterday. Teha dekaru le me'ane, right? That which they call him and he answers, Eno yotze mizimun, Shalom did come in. That's it. So he says it doesn't fulfill his obligation with zimun like that because he didn't have his intention to fulfill his obligation. Ela shekaru oto, unless they call him, right? He has to have it in mind. Hachrim kedei liftor atzman, in order to absolve themselves. And even though we said shlosha she'achlu echad mafsik dishnayim, right? We said that. Three, right, that are eating together. So here's the thing, right? It's a little bit, the person has to understand these nuances here. That niftaru shloshtan, that one stops two, niftaru shloshtan, and all three of them have full obligation, mizimun from zimun. So what does that mean? He stops. What that means that he can like tell them to hold on for a second, let's do zimun because he may have to leave or whatever. ונפטרו שלושתן מזימון, and זהו מפני שעומד עמהם, אבל that's because the one who's standing with them. אבל בכאן שאינו עומד עמהם, but since he's not standing with them, right, he went outside, as we said, right, to the market. אף על פי שאחרים נפטרים עמו, even though the others will fulfill obligation with him, בזימון, הוא עצמו לא יוצא ידי חובה במצוות, right? As we said, right? He will not fulfill his obligation, as we already mentioned. אבל הרמב"ם כתב פרק ה' שהוא הוציא ידי חובת זימון. Look what he says, right? Wow. So the Rambam says, right, not like them, not like these rabbis. He says that he also fulfills his obligation. That the third guy who right, jumped ahead, right, and did Birkat Hamazon. So there you go. Okay, well, that's interesting. So it seems like he favors this Rambam here on the other opinions. So we'll see here how he says in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, great. So it says here, שלושה שאכלו ויצא אחד מהם לשוק, right? As we said, three people, ate together. One of them goes outside, right, to the market, whatever. קוראים אותו ומודיעים לו שרוצים לזמן. One second. Yeah. So we call him, we tell him, you know what, we want to do zimun. So pay attention, please. Make sure you answer. And make sure you listen also. Right? So they do full obligation. Right. So he already, like you can see, he's writing like the Rambam, right? That they all fulfill their obligation. Not only the two guys, also the third guy as well. So I guess the Rambam, understands it like this, that he gets like dragged along with them, and since they're the majority, so he gets dragged along, and he also fulfills obligation. Go figure. Okay, good. So, ויוצאים ידי חובתן, אף על פי שאינו בא ויושב עמהם. והמם בגימל, ואנה מילה בגימל, that's only with three people, as we said, right? אבל בעשרה, when you have 10 people, it's a different story. כיוון שצריכים להזכיר את השם, since they have to mention the name of God, אינם מצטרפים עד שיבוא וישיב אמן. So then they don't combine unless what? He returns and sits with them. Otherwise, it's a no-go. Okay, says the Ramah here something short. Right? So he says, look in chapter 200, over there it's going to talk about the issue of the blessing of Zimun, right? Until when does it go? We'll see what that means when we get there. We got time. Okay, so we have time. We can do a little bit more. So it says here in Gimel, שלושה שאכלו כאחד ואין אחד מהם יודע כל ברכת המזון. Okay. So what happened here, right? Three people ate together. One of them, is sort of like illiterate, so he doesn't know how to read the whole Birkat Hamazon. He knows parts of it, right? I guess he knows it by heart, and the rest he doesn't know, so he can't say the whole thing, right? So let's see in the tour what he says about this. אלא אחד יודע ברכת הראשונה, ואחד השנייה, ואחד השלישית. Right? So here's the thing, interesting, right? So he says the situation is like this. The first guy knows the first blessing. Second guy knows the second blessing. Third guy knows the third blessing, right? So each one has his own niche over here. חייבים בברכת המזימון. So he says in a case like that, they are obligated to do zimun. So each one will bless the blessing that he knows, right? They'll do teamwork, over here, right? They'll combine together to do the whole thing from top to bottom. Why not? Okay, that sounds good. So, אבל אם אין כל אחד יודע אלא חצי ברכה, but what about if each one knows like half a blessing? So what happens over there? אין יכולים לזמן. So it says then they cannot do zimun. שאין ברכה אחת מתחלקת לשתיים. Look what he says, right? Because one blessing cannot be divided into two people. So we can't really work with halves, but that's a very unusual case, but whatever, right? Baruch Hashem, today we have a siddur. That's the thing, In those days, they didn't have a siddur. That was the problem. I was just talking today in the shul about this. With the people there. That what happened was like this. In the old days, uh, people didn't have siddurim. They didn't have prayer books. They just did everything by heart, basically. And what happened was that with the advent of the printing press, which was like 500 years ago, that's when they started to be printed, like on a massive scale. These books, prayer books, and all kinds of things, right? Chumashim, blah 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 blah. So before that, it was not a good situation. Really, they didn't really have nothing. It was like sometimes the whole community had like one or two books, for everybody, because they had to be handwritten. There was no printing press. There was no mass production. This was the problem. Uh, so this is why you have a situation like this. This guy knows this blessing, this guy knows this blessing, or this guy knows half a blessing, half a blessing. For God's sakes, right? Uh, yeah. But nowadays, we don't have this problem because everybody has a siddur. So you can read it yourself. It's you're never gonna be in such trouble like this. Okay. Anyway, we'll do Shulchan Aruch and we'll move on. Bet Yosef also. I'm sorry. Bet Yosef, Shulchan Aruch. We'll move on. So it says over here, Beresh Perek Shlosha She'achlu, regarding this situation that we just mentioned, right? That they don't know how to bless everybody. So he brings this also from the Gemara, Men Vav Amud Aleph. Tanechada. So it says, right, that one teaches over there, Birkat Hamazon, Shnaim, Shlosha, Tanya Idach, Shlosha Ve'arba. So one says two or three, one says three or four, Birkat Hamazon. So we have to see what that means, right? It's not clear. Katal Rif says the Rif, the Achi Perusho. This is what it means to say. Shnaim Shlosha She'achlu, Be'en Echad Mehem Yodea Levarech Birkat Hamazon. Let's say you have two or three people that ate together, right? And they don't know how to bless the whole thing, as we said, right? Kula ela echad yodea. One knows this blessing, right? Bracha rishona, and the other one knows the second blessing, right? V'shlishit she'eno yodea bracha rishona. Oh, it doesn't know the first blessing, knows the second one, doesn't know the third one. Each one knows a separate blessing. Oh, she'echad yodea levarech bracha rishona. Or right, one knows how to bless the first blessing. The second one knows how to do the second blessing. One knows how to do the third. As you said, right? In this case, since altogether, they have the whole Birkat Hamazon covered, and so they're okay. They can do it. They can pull it off, right? So therefore, they are obligated. And what are they going to do? They're going to do zimun also, right? The because each one can do is the blessing that he knows. And שהוא יודע, ונמצאת ברכת המזון משניהם מהם, או משלושתם, והוכיח כן בירושלמי. So he brings this from Yerushalmi, that you're allowed to do something like this. ואף על פי שרש"י פירש בעניין אחר, so even though Rashi explained in a different way that Yerushalmi, כבר הסכימו התוספות ורבנו יונה ורשב"א, all these Rishonim, right, agreed with like the Rif, right? שפירושו של הריף הוא הנכון. They said the Rif is the correct one. וכן נראה מדברי הראש, that's what it says in the Rosh also, seems like that, גם כן. וכתבו התוספות, אבל לחצאין אין לברך. But Tosfot says, right, but not half brachas, right? Half blessings we don't do. Forget about that. כתב הריף, the בירושלמי, motiv לרב נחמן. So says the Rif, right, that in the Yerushalmi, it questions there, and brings a question there on Rav Nachman. Damar Birkat Hamazon ena elad nivarech she'achalnu mishelo. Then he says, right, that Birkat Hamazon is only just this, this zimun language. Levad. V'nitanya, since we learned in the Braita, shnayim u'shlosha she'achlu chayavim Birkat Hamazon. Since it says there that two or three that ate together, they're obligated in Birkat Hamazon. Ha'arba'a lo, but not four. Ve'im ita Birkat Hamazon and if you're going to tell me, right, that the blessing of Zimun ad nevarech is only until nevarech, hava amar arba'a, you would have said four. Parik ashkach answers the Tani arba, the one Tana that writes four. V'ana de'amre kavate says, I say like him. Et tema zo hatov v'metiv, and you're going to tell me that's tov metiv, the blessing of tov metiv. He שנייה היא דאמר רב הונא הטוב מיטיב משנתנו משניתנו הרוגי ביתר לקבורה תקנו right. So he says, right, as we said, that the fourth blessing טוב מיטיב was given was written because of the issue with the burial of the dead of the Beitar, right? והוא ז"ל דאחי כמר, so it says, and he explains that this way means to say, if you're going to tell me that this Tana that taught four, because this blessing, the fourth blessing, with the Tana, this is the reason why I taught this way. You could have said, right, La Gavra Rabi'ah, that a fourth person could have said that one. You shouldn't say like that. The Birkat Tov Metiv, why? Because that one is rabbinical, so we're not so particular about it. In other words, when it's a pressing situation, we're talking about. So it doesn't count the Tana, right, with the ones which are from the Torah. Because Ravuna said, etc. So you see from here, right, implies that Tov Metiv is not really crucial, for this scenario. So what does that mean? Even if nobody knows how to say this blessing, they can still do zimun. That's why he didn't mention that they know the fourth blessing, since it doesn't really require that, to do this scenario, to perform this this methodology here. The Gemara Didan, so even though in our Gemara Amru they said there, the Rab Nachman Matzi Mitat Tatame, Rab Nachman can answer according to his reasoning. Ha Tanya, that which we learned in the Baita, Shnaim Shachlu, we're talking about here workers, De'enam Mibrachim Le'achar Amazon Lashte Brachot. They only do, as we already mentioned before, they only do two blessings after they eat a meal, right? Since they're right, the boss is doesn't want them to take too much time, off their work schedule, right? So they only allowed him to do two blessings, right? The first two blessings. We already said, by the way, if you remember, that it doesn't apply in our times, this halacha. But anyway, in those days, that's the way it was, because nowadays the boss is not so particular about things like this. He gives you a lunch hour, he gives you, coffee break and all kinds of stuff, right? So you can do what you want pretty much, right? You can do Birkat Hamazon the normal way. Nobody cares about that. Nobody's particular about it. Anyway, so getting back to our situation, ואם נברך הם שלושה, מברכים מלאכת מזון, אלא שתי ברכות, כלומר, ואם נברך הם שלושה, אף על פי שירושלמי כחולק בזה עם תלמוד עדידן, כל מקום כמה שאפשר שהם שווים שפיר. עיקר להוכיח ירושלמי פירוש דברי הבבלי. So he says, right, that even though we find some discrepancy here between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi regarding, right, this scenario that we mentioned, so he says, but there, it's better to explain it in a way that equates them, to get, in other words, that there should be no machloket. So, by the way, this is like a general rule in halakha, in Talmudic, right, in Talmudic methodology, which is that, I was taught by this my rabbis, when I was a young guy, a young kid, right, in my younger days, they told me like this, that it's always preferable if you see like two different sources, right, that seem to have a machloket between them. If you're able to reconcile them, in a normal, right, logical manner, and say that there's no machloket between them, that's the preferred method, So if you can do that, you should try to do it. As we said, right, as long as it's not normal, it shouldn't be something like very forced, very out of the ordinary, something like that, right? Too sharp, that we don't want. But something in a normal way to reconcile them, it's better. So why is that? Because we're always looking to decrease machloket, in halakha and in Talmud, same thing, right? So, if you can do it, right, all the power to you, right? That's what we want, that's the preferred way to do things. That's what he's saying over here. Okay, great. So let's see Shulchan Aruch, and we're done with this chapter. And I guess we'll cut it there. Let's see what we can do here. So this was Gimel, yeah. Okay, so next time we'll do Kuf Tzadik Hey. Yeah, that's an important one also. Next chapter, important for the concept of Zimun. Anyway, let's look at Shulchan Aruch. It says here like this: Gimel she'achlu ke'echad ve'en echad mehem yodea kol Birkat Hamazon. As you said, right? We have three people. They ate together, right? And no one knows the whole Birkat Hamazon, right? One knows this blessing, one knows that blessing, right? So on and so forth, so on. אלא אחד יודע ברכה ראשונה, ואחד שנייה, ואחד שלישית. Right? Each one knows one of the three blessings, right? In the Birkat Hamazon. So we already mentioned, right? There's four blessings, but the fourth one, since it's rabbinical, so in a case like this, we're not so particular, because it's a very dire straits kind of case. That's why. So they should do zimun in a case like this. And even though, right, there's nobody there who knows the fourth blessing, as we said, right? The fourth blessing is not crucial. Right? So, in a case like this, right, we can skip it. But he says, right, as we already mentioned, but don't do like half blessings, right? That you cannot do. Either you know the whole thing, right, or it's like zero. You might as well can it, right? Don't say nothing. So, אבל לחצאין אין לברך, אם האחד אינו יודע כי אם חצי הברכה, שאין הברכה אחד מתחלק לשתיים. So why is that? Because one blessing cannot be divided into two readers, right? This we cannot do. This is also like sort of a general rule, that we don't divide one blessing into two people. But we can do like one blessing this guy, one blessing that guy. That we can do, in a case of need, in time of need. Okay, fantastic. So we're done with this chapter. So I guess we'll cut it here. B'ezrat Hashem. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch Leila Tov. Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you on Sunday. B'ezrat Hashem, God willing. Have a great Shabbat.
Thank you, Rabbi.
so much.
God bless. All the best.